Hello everyone and welcome to this Unitera webinar on PEO and payroll. We have attendees from all corners of the globe today, so good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone who has taken the time to attend this session. Focus of this short webinar today is to take a closer look at the key differences between employing workers via a PEO model, or sometimes known as EOR or GEO, and is an indirect employment model, versus employing workers via a more traditional direct payroll model. The webinar is scheduled to run for 30 minutes. So our intention is to talk for about 20 minutes. And that will provide a high-level overview of the different models, how they compare against each other. And we'll then explore some of the key differentiators between the two, and also look at some areas of consideration that your organization should be looking at before you hire internationally. We welcome an interactive session, so if you'd like to pose questions throughout, please do so through the chat. We've also got a couple of poll questions that we'll be asking. So we at Unitera are pretty well placed to address this question. And we are looking to provide kind of unbiased views on both of these models, as our business supports roughly 300 customers today, and we operate in about 70 countries. And conversations every day we have around, should we go down a PEO route? Should we hire through a direct model? And sometimes with our customers that have got larger headcounts, there is a mix of the two. And we often get into conversations around what is the best approach. So we've seen the pain points that organizations like yourselves will experience when hiring internationally. We've worked with over 500 CFOs, financial controllers, heads of people and HR directors, and lots of international payroll teams as they go on their international journeys. So hopefully this session will be helpful. So without further ado, let's dive in. So quick overview of who we are. So hello everybody, my name is David Wall and I'm the CEO of Unitera. I'm a UK qualified lawyer by background, and I set up Unitera about 7 years ago now with my co-founder Julian Christmas. We've worked in that time with all sorts of shapes and sizes of businesses, and we absolutely love what we do. It's a really exciting space, and every day we're advising fast growth businesses around these topics. We know from our own experience, though, that if you get it wrong, it can be very expensive and costly. And that's why we are here to help and guide businesses like yourselves on that international journey. I'll just hand you over briefly to my colleague, Merryn, who can give you a quick overview of herself and a bit about her background.
Thank you, David, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our attendees. So I'm Head of International HR at Unitera. I've worked in the field of international HR for a number of years now. My specialisms are really on the employment law, E&D, change management and employee engagement piece. So I myself have worked within a number of sectors, and I've worked with clients within a number of sectors varying from FMCG to tech to healthcare. And my country specialisms range from everywhere from the Netherlands to South Africa and everywhere in between.
She's a bit of a rock star.
Thank you, David.
What we propose to do to start with is give a very high level overview of the indirect model of hiring employees, i.e. the PEO/EOR/GEO model. And Merryn's going to walk us through that. And then we'll shift to the direct model, and I'll take us through that and some of the key constituents of a direct employment relationship.
Thank you. So, for those that don't know what a PEO is, you may have heard of it being referred to as an EOR, so that's Employer of Record. This is where hires are essentially made and contracted to a third-party service provider. So, when you're bringing a new hire on board, they're signing an employment contract with that third-party service provider or related entity. Where this is really good and beneficial for companies is it's a very quick solution. You'll find that PEOs can onboard people within a matter of days. It allows that really rapid onboarding when you need to get somebody on the books ASAP. It can also be very helpful where you've got a complex market where it's either quite time consuming or very difficult to establish a registration or entity in that country. A PEO will additionally allow for complete compliance with employment laws, so they'll have locally compliant employment contracts, so you can ensure that you're bringing on people quickly with a contract that will align with the relevant legislation. Having said that, one of the challenges of a PEO is that it's not always clear which party is responsible for the employment relationship, and that's where there can be some difficulties with onboarding and hiring employees, because it's not always 100% clear cut in that case.
Merryn, thank you for that. I think the key thing to remember as well for our audience is there is lots of different shapes and sizes in terms of PEO providers in the market. Some are very heavily influenced by technology. So a lot of the interactions you will have will be through the technology platform and less so through human beings, whereas there are other PEO providers which are much more service-based and less focused on technology. And I think, we don't err on either side and we're kind of unbiased in this area. But our business is all around people and talking and guiding, and going international is complex. So, you just need to think about if you are going to hire through a PEO model, it's not just about putting somebody on a technology platform normally, because there will be issues that come up along the journey where it's good to talk to somebody that actually understands the in-country market nuance or knowledge, and they have it. So that's the only comment I would have in terms of the PEO solution, Merryn, and the options available in the market.
Thank you. I think we can move on to the payroll solution now.
Okay, so this will be much more familiar to our audience in terms of a direct employment relationship model. And again, I'm just gonna go over some of the key constituents of what an international payroll would look like. But some of these areas are actually really critical when it comes to hiring employees or workers in overseas markets, because it makes such a difference in terms of their relationship with the mothership or the HQ. So if we look at a direct employment model, the first thing we're thinking about is the setting up. So what does that mean? So typically your organization will have either a legal entity in a particular country, or in lots of cases, particularly in Europe, they'll have a payroll registration that allows you to hire locally and compliantly. So we do a lot of work in this area, and particularly in mainland Europe, as I mentioned, it is possible to avoid the need to set up an entity and hire individuals via a lighter touch payroll registration. Admittedly, it's not as quick as a PEO solution, but very often it can be cheaper. So if cost is a consideration, a payroll registration is a really good solution. And it is also a lighter touch footprint. So you're not quite going all that way into setting up entities and the costs associated with that. Another key factor about a direct employment model and running people through payroll is your organization owns that relationship with that employee. Now, why is that important? So your organization may, or they may not, place a lot of emphasis on culture. Now, we at Unitera, we have international employees and we place a lot of emphasis on culture. So our international workforce are on very similar employment contracts to our UK-based employees, and they have equivalent benefits packets in the international markets that they operate in. So they're not different, okay? And everybody is on the same journey together. Now, some businesses don't view it like that, but if you're from an organization that has a real emphasis on, maintaining a really strong positive culture, then a direct employment model and payrolling them has to be the way forward. It also ties into the employment contract. You have control over what goes into that employment contract. So a lot of PEOs, not all of them, but a lot of them, they will issue a template employment contract. So you're less able to influence things around intellectual property or your benefits plans or the way that you may treat holiday if you want consistency across the organization. So there's real benefits to a direct employment model. And it also ties into the next point that I'm going to make around onboarding. So very often, when you bring a new hire into your organization, the first couple of days, weeks, and arguably months are critical to how they feel about your organization. So with the PEOs, they will do a lot of that. But with a direct employment model, you can put your own stamp on that onboarding. And we found, certainly from our own experience, that this is a really key factor. And it's a big consideration that your organizations need to think about if it's a longer term play and you are looking to scale up in a particular market. So if you make an initial hire in France or Germany or Spain or whatever country for that matter, if the long-term goal is to scale up and add headcount, then inevitably, and we're going to come on to some of these topics later, you have to think about the culture of those employees in that particular market. The final point I'll make, and it's not on the slide, is around costs. I've touched on it briefly. Now, particularly in Europe, there's a direct employment relationship. The costs are arguably going to be cheaper than a PEO. So if cost is an issue to your organization, then I would encourage you to look at a payroll registration option, because it will involve the cost of a payroll registration, the cost of an employment contract, and the cost of putting those benefits in place, and obviously running the local payroll. But it may still be more commercially viable than a PEO. It's just a consideration. Payroll registrations, unfortunately, aren't necessarily available everywhere. So in Latin America and Asia, they're less attractive. So then you're looking at entities, and then you're looking at a different set of costs to manage and keep that local entity compliant.
I was just going to say, on that note, we've had a question come in where someone's asked if there are any countries where you'd recommend a PEO over payroll due to complicated laws, risks, etc. I know you just briefly touched on that. I don't know whether you're able to expand at all.
Talk about putting me on the spot. The two countries that come to mind are China and Brazil. And the reason for that is both of those countries are incredibly complex and actually very bureaucratic in terms of setting up operations. So in China, it's a very expensive exercise to set up a WFOE, a wholly owned foreign entity. And you're easily talking £30,000 just to get the legal entity set up. In Brazil, they change the laws every single day. It's constantly moving. So whenever we get customers or prospects that talk to us about setting up in Latin America and Brazil comes up, our default is always look at a PEO first.
Thank you. I think we have a question next.
Okay, so this is our first poll question, and I'm going to stop talking now. I'm interested for you guys to give us some answers. So I'm interested in, how does your business currently engage its international workforce? So do you run exclusively on payroll? Is it a PEO solution, or are you running both? Okay, so the responses have come in, and actually interestingly, and I'm quite surprised by this. So there's a heavy focus on payroll. None of the respondents is saying that they exclusively operate their international workforce on PEOs, but there is some respondents that say they use both models, so a direct employment model through payroll and PEO. So thank you for that. That's helpful. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm gonna canter through some of these because I really want to leave time for questions at the end. So this is a comparison table, and what we're talking about here is a side-by-side high-level comparison of the two solutions, and it gives a sense from our perspective, ours being Unitera's perspective, as to where the strengths of the two solutions lie. So if we quickly move through those, we'll try and give you a bit of a perspective on each line item of that table, and hopefully that helps. So if we look at time frame as the first one, hands down, if you need to hire somebody really quickly in a particular market, so I'm talking about within, you get an instruction from your operations team and they need a software engineer in Croatia as an example, you're not going to get a payroll registration set up in 3 or 4 days. So PEO is absolutely the way that you should be going from a short time frame perspective. We touched on costs earlier, and cost has been ticked on both sides of the PEO and the payroll columns. And that's because largely, if you came to us with a particular scenario, it really does depend on what country you are looking to enter, how long you've got, and what your longer term plan is. So in Europe, I've touched on this payroll registration, and it is more cost effective than typically a PEO solution. But again, it ties into the, if you're only going to have 1 or 2 low headcount employees in particular markets, it might be that cost is not that much of an issue for you. As you scale, and we're going to drop down to scale in a minute, as the headcount grows, then it's really important that, I'm guessing that, one of the considerations is, how much is this all costing to keep this operation going in Germany or Italy or Japan or wherever it might be, and really, to scale an organization, and I'm talking kind of 5, 10 upwards employees, payroll is going to be far more compelling. I want to touch on culture, Merryn, because we've ticked the payroll box there and not the PEO box. It ties into some of the comments I made earlier, but have you got anything to add over and above
I mean, I could do an
already?
entire webinar on the culture of payroll versus PEO. So what we're seeing at the moment is quite a trend from companies moving away from PEO to direct hiring, where their focus is particularly on the employee engagement. The payroll setup is generally significantly more beneficial for employees from a cultural perspective. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We tend to see clients nowadays asking them the question is, are we creating that right culture, or are our staff going to leave? Because it all ties into the retention. The advantage that you have with a payroll solution is that you've got that element of control over the employee life cycle. You're moving away from having any potential resistance from the PEO relationship. The other key thing to just bear in mind in this is that when you've got a PEO, there can be a real lack of flexibility on the benefits piece, which is something a lot of companies are offering nowadays to try and attract the right candidates. Within a PEO, what you have is they'll assign a large number of employees, hundreds potentially across all their various clients, to fixed benefits. And that means you're really losing the opportunity to tailor your benefits, benchmark them across your industry, sectors, and the various level of employees. So you're really kind of losing out on that aspect of things. We'll touch more on the culture piece in the next couple of slides as well. But if anyone has any particular questions on that, feel free to reach out to me either on the questions or myself directly, and I'd be very happy to talk through it in more detail.
Great, thanks, Merryn. I'm going to move along quickly now because we're burning through time. The only point I want to raise on here, and we're going to talk about it a bit more now, is risk. So if we just move to the next slide. So when choosing a hiring solution, what is the most important factor? And this is another poll question. So interestingly, cost is less of an issue, and employee experience is really jumping out as the key answer there. And that's consistent with the things that we are seeing, and Merryn's talked about earlier in terms of, you know, what is it that you're trying to do, and what is the long-term plan for your organization? Is it around culture? Is it around making sure that you scale operations and those individuals feel part of your organization? So thank you for answering. In terms of the risk factors, I'm gonna canter through these, but risk is very subjective and really depend on your organization and your organization's appetite to risk. We work with lots of organizations that are very, very risk adverse, but equally, for every business that we work with that is risk adverse, we work with businesses that are in a hurry, and they are willing to take on more commercial risk than perhaps others would, because they want to get more market share and they want to get moving. All right. And, you know, and we work with lots of those. So just touching on a couple of the risk areas here. So permanent establishment is the first big risk area when it comes to setting up an operation internationally, whether it be PEO or payroll. Quick question for the attendees. Says, does everybody understand the concept of permanent establishment? Wow, we've got lots of experts in the room. I'm very impressed. Okay, so for those that have answered no, okay, I'm just going to give a very quick scenario around what permanent establishment is and a bit of a definition. So where the risk lies here is if your organization engages in activity in a way that inadvertently triggers a tax exposure, whether it be corporate tax or VAT or whatever it is, that causes a problem if you haven't got the correct registrations or infrastructure set up with the local authorities. So a classic example is where a business will go out and hire a senior salesperson in mainland Europe, let's just say Italy, for example, and they've employed them on a PEO or a payroll registration without a legal entity, and they're starting to generate sales. Now, that sales revenue may or may not hit the local taxing authorities, but if it does, then that causes a problem. And what the problem looks like is typically a tax investigation or a tax audit. Now, those are real headaches. They suck a lot of time out of your management, and really you want to try and avoid that. And that's why when you are going down the road of, you know, thinking about a PEO provider, or whether you are thinking about a payroll registration, you need to be asking the right questions of your providers or your partners that you're working with in country to make sure that you get the right answers. Because in essence, what you want to be doing is making sure that you sleep at night. The only other point, conscious of time, is employee resistance here that I want to just skip to. And Merryn, again, you're doing this day in, day out. So I'm keen to get a little bit of your insights into you know, the resistance to certain types of models as you know, businesses expand.
Thank you. So a lot of the resistance that's right from the recruitment process. Employees, potential candidates may not understand what a PEO model is. So people can be very off-put. They want to know that they're being employed by the people that they're interviewing with. And when we speak to some of our recruitment partners, we hear that they are getting pushback from candidates that are being hired under a PEO, potentially losing out on those people. The other aspect is exactly what we touched on in terms of the culture. When you're expanding overseas, individuals want to know that they're still being employed by yourselves. that the companies actually have the autonomy over the decisions. They're not being bound by any third party. So as I say, I can talk through that more with anyone that's got any particular questions. I'm conscious that we need to allow some time for questions at the end. So if you do have anything outside of this you want to pick up, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thanks, Merryn. Okay, let's move on then. So in terms of compliance, what is right for you? So I'm going to skip through this slide quickly, but in essence, the reason why compliance is such a key area is inevitably at some point down the line, your organization will go through a liquidity event or a transaction where there will be due diligence, or there will be, there will be a review of your operations to make sure that you are compliant. And the reason why, we talk about compliance all the time in our business, and it is or can be a really boring subject. And it's a subject that nobody wants to talk about until things go wrong. So it's really important that your organization, whichever route you go down, has compliance at the forefront of your minds, because ultimately it's all very well moving quickly, but if things are not set up in the right way at the right time and it comes back to bite you, it can be really expensive. Going right back to my point at the start of the presentation, expensive and time consuming, and this is stuff that you don't want to be messing around with. So if we look through just very quickly in terms of the employment law landscape, so PEO and payroll should both be covered off. So the PEO model will typically control and they will take responsibility for the HR landscape. If you work with an organization like Unitera, we take care, we have a fully outsourced HR model, which Merryn runs. She's in charge of our international unit. And we therefore provide completely compliant HR in terms of that employment law piece. So that's really important. Another area which I just wanted to touch on, and I appreciate that I'm skipping through things quickly, but is stock options. So PEO typically don't cater for stock options. And if you are an organization that is on the move, is growing fast, and stock options is something that you are thinking of giving to, employees in different countries, then it's far easier to do it via a direct payroll model. So I thought that's a helpful point. Would you know how to handle an employment relations issue outside your HQ country? So this is really, how much do you know? Are you confident that you've got the skills to deal with this? So real mixed bunch answers. So we've got a couple that said yes, they'd be comfortable. There's quite a few people that have said no, and that is that's why we're here. That as an organisation, we try and provide unbiased advice around what kind of model you have or you want to operate, but our core focus is around international payroll and international HR. So yes. If you've got any questions on that.
Sorry to interrupt, David. And just to add to that, if you do have any particular HR questions on ER matters, we can operate international HR as a standalone service in terms of the consultancy. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any particular questions or ad hoc issues that are cropping up.
Thank you, Merryn. So I am going to move to a couple of questions now, because I'm very conscious that we're just slightly overrunning. So perhaps we'll take one question. If there are questions that we don't answer, because we've got several, I think, already on the polls and the chat, and we had some questions that came through actually in advance of this webinar, then we will respond to you and we will feed back and we'll provide those answers to you, and we'd love to do that. So question, Merryn, for you, please, is we've got, so one of our attendees has got an employee moving from the UK to Germany, and they're asking what solution would be the best fit for their business.
That's a really good question. It's one a lot of our clients have. So if you have time on side, payroll solution is by far the best solution. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that you can recognize the I can not say the word, you can recognize the seniority and length of service of the individual. So that can be reflected in their employment contract. And they'll be reassured by continuing to be your employee. The other aspect of that question is if they're moving to Germany. Germany has quite strict restrictions around the PEO model in that it cannot continue more than 18 months. So in 18 months' time, in any case, you'd be having to then have that same conversation and move them to being a direct hire. So where time's luxury, payroll solution. If you needed to get them on the books within a day or two, albeit we can turn things around quite quickly in terms of employment contracts, it may be that actually a PEO solution is best for you. On the same vein of international hiring, now we've had another question through too, which I'm really eager to address because it's a fantastic question. Somebody has inquired as to if you run payroll in several different countries that have different employment laws. They want to have an international contract giving everyone the same amount of holidays, but it's fewer than some of the countries' employment laws. Is that valid, or do they have to offer the most beneficial of all the countries? So there's a couple of responses to that. Number one is you would always have to offer the statutory minimum holiday entitlement, and that's the same with all benefits. You'd always have to offer the statutory minimum. If you had some countries that were lower than your standard offering, you'd still have to offer it. A lot of our clients do want to benchmark worldwide, so across the business. So where that's the case, we'll look at sort of the low, median, high-end values in terms of benchmarking. So often it's a better solution to say, look, we want to offer the median value benchmarking for all these enhanced benefits across the board, and we can measure that out with the client and come up with the best solution moving forward.
Great, thanks, Merryn. I think we should call a halt to it there because I'm just conscious that we're nearly up to 35 minutes. So I'd just like to thank Merryn for your time today, very much appreciated. Thank all the attendees today. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that some of you, it's quite late in the evening, and then that there's a handful of attendees that are on the West Coast as well, so it's a bit earlier in the morning for them. So very much appreciated. We are Unitera. If you ever need any help or support, by all means, there you go. It's up on the screen. Speak to an expert, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your time.